The knock came just before sunset, so faint the cowboy almost thought the wind had rattled the door again. He had just finished tending the horses, the sky stretched white and amber beyond the trees, when the sound came a second time, soft, uncertain, desperate. He crossed the small cabin and opened the door to find a little boy standing there, no older than 6 or 7, his boots too big and his clothes coated in prairie dust. His dark eyes were wide, shining with fear he was trying very hard to hide. The boy leaned forward, lowering his voice as if the world itself might be listening. "Mama can't walk anymore," he whispered. The words hit the cowboy harder than any shout could have. He followed the boy's trembling point toward the edge of the clearing. There, slumped against a broken fence post, was a woman barely conscious, her body sagging unnaturally, her head bowed. One of her shoes lay a few feet away, her dress torn at the hem, her skin pale beneath the grime of travel. She had clearly tried to go farther, and failed. The boy swallowed hard. "She told me to keep going," he said, his voice cracking. "But she fell," she said to ask for help. The cowboy didn't ask where they had come from or why they were there. He didn't hesitate. He moved past the boy in long strides, kneeling beside the woman. She stirred faintly, her lips parting as if to speak, but no words came. Her breathing was shallow, her legs stiff, one ankle swollen badly. Exhaustion clung to her like a second skin. "It's all right," the cowboy said gently, more to the boy than the woman. "I've got you." He slid one arm beneath her shoulders and the other beneath her knees, lifting her carefully. She was lighter than she should have been, and that alone told him how long they had been struggling. The boy rushed closer, panic flashing across his face. "Don't drop her," he pleaded. "I won't," the cowboy said firmly. "You hold on to me." The boy wrapped his small arms around the cowboy's coat as they began the walk back toward the cabin. Each step felt heavier than the last, not because of the weight in his arms, but because of the story written in the woman's worn hands and the child's fear-filled silence. The prairie stretched endlessly around them, the sun sinking low, shadows lengthening like fingers reaching for what little light remained. Halfway to the cabin, the woman stirred again. "I'm sorry," she murmured faintly. "I didn't mean to be trouble." "You're not," the cowboy replied without slowing. "You're safe now." The boy looked up at him then, searching his face as if trying to decide whether to believe him. Something in the cowboy's steady stride, in the way he didn't waver or complain, must have convinced him. The boy tightened his grip and nodded, resting his cheek against the cowboy's side. When they reached the cabin, the cowboy pushed the door open with his shoulder. Warm air and the faint smell of wood smoke greeted them. He carried the woman inside and laid her gently on the bed, easing her legs straight with careful hands. The boy hovered close, watching every movement, his small chest rising and falling too fast. "You did good," the cowboy said quietly to him. "You saved her." The boy blinked, tears spilling at last, but he didn't wipe them away. Outside, the sun slipped below the horizon, and darkness crept across the land. Inside the cabin, though, something else had arrived. Hope, fragile but alive, carried in on tired arms just before the light faded. The cabin seemed to exhale once the door was shut, the wind's howl reduced to a distant murmur outside the thick wooden walls. The cowboy moved with calm urgency, stoking the fire until the flames rose higher, filling the room with warmth and soft, flickering light. The woman lay still on the bed, her breathing shallow but steady now, while the little boy hovered near the foot of the mattress, afraid to sit, afraid to look away. His small hands twisted the hem of his shirt, and every few seconds his eyes darted to his mother's face as if checking she was still there. The cowboy returned with a tin cup of water and gently pressed it to the woman's lips. "Slow," he murmured. "Just a little." She swallowed weakly, her brow tightening in pain, and he stopped, nodding as if she had spoken. He knew exhaustion when he saw it, the kind that steals strength from the bones and leaves the body trembling. He pulled a blanket from a hook on the wall and laid it over her carefully, tucking it around her shoulders with a tenderness that surprised even him. "I didn't want him to see me like this," the woman whispered, her eyes fluttering open just long enough to glance at her son. "I told him I'd be fine." The boy shook his head fiercely. "You wasn't fine," he said, his voice small but firm. "You couldn't stand." The cowboy crouched beside him. "You were right to come," he said. "Bravest thing I've seen in a long while." The boy hesitated, then nodded, as if accepting a truth he hadn't allowed himself to believe yet. His shoulders eased just a little. The cowboy set about his work again, heating water, mixing herbs he kept for the horses but knew could help ease fever and swelling. He checked the woman's ankle, his touch gentle but sure. It was badly strained, maybe worse, but rest and warmth would help. He cleaned the dirt from her hands, noting how thin her fingers were, how hard life must have been before she ever reached his door. Outside, the wind rattled the shutters, and the sky darkened into night. Inside, lantern light cast golden shadows across the walls, turning the cabin into a small island of safety. The boy finally sat on the edge of a chair, exhaustion overtaking fear. His eyes drooped, but every time they closed, he startled awake again. "You can rest," the cowboy told him softly. "I'll stay right here. Promise?" the boy asked. "I promise." The boy slid off the chair and curled up on the rug by the fire, his body relaxing at last. Within minutes, his breathing evened out, the deep sleep of a child who had held himself together for far too long. The cowboy watched him for a moment, something tightening in his chest. He had lived alone for years, filling the quiet with work and routine, telling himself he didn't need more. Now the silence was different, full instead of empty. The woman stirred again, her eyes clearer this time. "I don't know how to thank you," she said weakly. "We were just trying to get to the next town." I thought I could make it. You did, he said simply. You got him here. Tears slid down her temples, disappearing into the pillow. I was so scared, she admitted. So was he, the cowboy replied gently. But he didn't give up on you. She turned her head, looking at her sleeping son, and her face crumpled with emotion. The cowboy stood, adding another log to the fire, then pulled a chair closer to the bed. He wasn't going anywhere, not tonight. Outside, the prairie lay cold and unforgiving, but inside the cabin, a quiet vigil held steady, guarding 2 lives that had arrived at his door just in time. Morning arrived slowly, light creeping through the small cabin window in pale streaks of gold. The fire had burned down to soft embers, and the air carried the comforting smell of wood smoke and warm earth. The woman stirred first, blinking as if unsure where she was. For a moment, panic flickered in her eyes, then softened as she took in the quiet room, the blanket wrapped snugly around her shoulders, and her son sleeping peacefully on the rug by the hearth. She tried to move and winced, a sharp reminder shooting through her leg, but it was nothing like the pain from the night before. Her strength hadn't fully returned, yet the feverish weakness was gone. She exhaled shakily, pressing a hand to her chest in relief. Thank you, she whispered, though she wasn't sure if anyone was awake to hear it. The cowboy sat at the small table nearby, mending something with practiced hands. He looked up at the sound of her voice and offered a faint smile, the kind that didn't demand anything in return. You're improving, he said. That's a good sign. Her eyes drifted back to her son. He didn't cry once after we got here, she said softly. I've never seen him trust someone so quickly. He knew he had no choice, the cowboy replied gently. And he knew you needed help. The boy stirred then, rubbing his eyes as he sat up. When he saw his mother awake, he scrambled to his feet and rushed to her side. Mama, he asked, fear creeping back into his voice. I'm here, she said, smiling through tears as she reached for him. I'm okay. He climbed onto the bed carefully, hugging her as if afraid she might disappear again. The cowboy turned away slightly, giving them space, but he couldn't ignore the warmth spreading through his chest. The sight stirred something deep inside him, memories of a life he'd once imagined but never thought he'd have. Later, as sunlight filled the cabin, the woman tried again to insist they should leave. We can't stay, she said. You've already done more than enough. The cowboy shook his head. You'll stay until you can walk without pain, he said firmly. Both of you. The boy looked up at him, eyes bright. Really, the cowboy answered. No one's sending you back into the cold. The woman's resolve wavered. She nodded slowly, emotion tightening her throat. For the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to believe that resting didn't mean failing, that accepting help wasn't weakness. As the day unfolded, the cabin felt less like a shelter and more like a home. The boy followed the cowboy everywhere, asking endless questions, laughing when the horses snorted or stamped their hooves. The woman watched from the window, her heart full in a way she hadn't known was possible anymore. By evening, the cowboy stood outside, looking across the land he'd worked alone for so long. Behind him, laughter drifted from the cabin. Carrying them inside had been an instinct, a simple act of doing what was right. But now he understood it had changed everything. He hadn't just saved them that night, they had found him too.